Happy Thursday, everybody. It's Evan Lazar and Alex Barth, Patriots Beat podcast. And tonight, Alex, we're going to break down the schedule that was released early, then released again at 8 o'clock yesterday. And we can take a few minutes to just look at the schedule from a bird's eye view, I think, going game by game and trying to break down wins and losses this time of year, I think is a little bit of a fool's errand. But
we'll have plenty of time to do matchups and all that stuff. Yeah,
you're right. So we can talk about some other big picture things about the schedule that stood out to us. Then after we do that, we're going to take some questions. We're going to, chat about some things Patriots related. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff on everybody's mind still as we get into we have mini camp coming up in mid-June, but this lull and then the lull after mini camp is kind of the true dead period of the NFL calendar, but there's always things to talk about. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can. But first, Alex, let's start with the schedule. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway, and I know you had that stat that you can tell me now about the bye weeks and teams coming off the bye weeks. I think in terms of when you look at the schedule, the biggest takeaway is that the Patriots got screwed once again in terms of rest, right? Teams that they're going to be playing are going to be well rested compared to the Pats. And I think in terms of net rest days differential, this is a stat that ESPN put out there, the Patriots are at minus 15, which is worse in the league. They are dead last, so they have the least amount of rest relative to their opponents in their schedule, which is not a major surprise. I would say that the Patriots are a team that is going to play a lot of teams coming off a bye and things like that. But if you're going to look at schedule sort of storylines or angles, I feel like rest and how things stagger themselves out throughout the course of the season is the place to go.
Certainly. And it's a longer season now. And I know it's only one game, but there's a mental element to that too, just knowing the season is longer. And so the Patriots play 3 teams coming off byes. No other team plays more than 2. They also play, and I'm trying to remember the week, but they do play a team that's coming off of a Thursday night game. So that team has like what some people call the mini bye.
Right.
You have
the Patriots had one of those in week 11 with Atlanta.
Every team gets one. So where the minus 15 comes from, right? The net rest days is not only do the Patriots play 3 teams coming off byes, one of those weeks, right? They are coming off the bye themselves. That is week 15. So when they play the Colts, both the Patriots and Colts have their bye in week 14. So yes, they get the extra rest, but they don't get the advantage from it because the Colts are coming off an extra week off as well. So I feel like this happens every year. Like I look and the Patriots are playing the most teams coming off byes, or they're playing a bunch of teams coming off Thursday night games. And I feel like the league just does this, Goodell, clown nose picture, all of that. But they'll fight through it. The bigger injustice to me is how late their bye week is. It's not ideal to play so many teams coming off the bye, but look, I know the NFL, they added another week, so they want to stretch the bye weeks out, and that's fine, and that's well and good. But there's one week, I think it's week 8 or 9, that there's only 2 byes, right? You shouldn't have a bye middle of December. You should not have a bye December 14th. That's just not that's not the purpose of that week. That's not the purpose of putting a week off in. Maybe if they had gone to 2 byes, like some people thought they would, it would make more sense. But that's just and if you're going to do that, put the Thursday night game early in the season so you get that half bye earlier on. That's week 11. So they are just going bang, bang, bang. Even the Monday night game is in early December. So they're going bang, bang, bang until the week before Thanksgiving, which is just going to be brutal. It's going to be tough. We know the Patriots always emphasize conditioning. So it's hard to say that conditioning will be important this year because it's always number 1 on their training camp checklist. But there's just a little bit more this year with conditioning that is just a little bit more important because it's going to be a gauntlet in terms of the actual scheduling in the first half. And the second half, it breaks up a little more. But at the same time, the opponents are a little harder, and that probably factors in more. But yeah, they got screwed with that late bye. I
would rather have a late bye than an early bye, though.
Oh, I would rather have it late than early. But you want it somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Even if it was the old late bye. The old late bye was week 12. That's Thanksgiving. That's like, okay, that's not bad. You're still splitting the season up like 10-6. It would be 10-7 now. You're still about halfway. They're breaking this thing up now. What is it? They're at 17 They're was it 12-4 at the 13-4. I can't do basic addition. They're breaking up 13-4. They're playing 13 straight games to start the season. That is brutal.
Is a lot, look, they did avoid some of the schedule, landmines, right? They're not going to London.
Yes.
That's a big one. I think whenever you make a London trip or play on Thanksgiving or those types of things, which were possibilities for the Patriots, that I think is a benefit to you to not avoid those types of things.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
I don't mind the late bye as much, especially because of the extra week in the season, right? So it does set up nicely to have a shorter stretch after the bye week. I think that's really the only thing that you can nitpick in terms of the schedule, though, because if you look at some of the projections sites that put out there, like Pro Football Focus or some of the ESPN projections, going off of the Patriots' opponents off season. So we're not talking about 2020 win-loss record projecting forward to 2021. We're talking about stats that have been adjusted for off-season transactions and off-season moves. The Patriots have a relatively easy schedule. And that, I think, is the one benefit that you do get from the fact that they weren't a playoff team last year, right? You don't play. We're so used to playing a first place schedule. Well, for the first time in 20 years, they're not playing a first place schedule. They're playing a third place schedule. So there's some benefit to that as well, that their opponents are a little bit easier. I look at this schedule and there's obviously the Tampa Bay game that's going to be tough. And the Bills are going to be a tough team to beat. Miami's going to be a tough team to beat in the division. But relatively speaking, I think this is a pretty easy schedule by NFL standards. There's no easy schedule, right? There's no easy, really, truly easy schedule in the league because there's so many good teams. But overall, I feel like the Patriots have a pretty winnable schedule. I don't look at this schedule like last year. I thought that the schedule was pretty much a gauntlet from start to finish, right? You play the NFC West. You play a lot of teams that won their division the year before. That was a tough schedule, and it played out that way. This year's schedule, I think there's a ton of winnable games, especially the fact that a lot of the hard games are at home, right? Like you get Tampa Bay at home. You get Dallas at home. Obviously, you get one at home against Buffalo.
Titans are at home.
Titans are at home. Cleveland is at home. So the road slate I think they could potentially have a very good road record this year if they can, kind of rise to those occasions on the road. So I really feel like that's a nice benefit there, as well as a lot of these difficult games on their schedule this year are home games. Yeah,
Colts and Bills sandwiching the bye, probably the toughest. I'll say this too. I think, ideally you want the schedule to be balanced. You want the hard games spread out. You want the easy games spread out. You want to go like hard, easy, whatever. If they have to be packed, you almost want the tougher games at the back end, I feel like, especially with a Bill Belichick coach team where he preaches you play your best football after Thanksgiving. And that's what this is. The meat of the Patriots schedule where they're really going to be tested. They do have Tampa in week 4. That stands out from the first half. But if you look at it, Cleveland is in the second half of the schedule. Tennessee's in the second half. Both Bills games, the Colts at Miami's in the second half. And I know some Patriots fans will cringe at going to Miami late in the season, and that's fair. But the other thing to look at is they play 5 of their first 7 at home, including 4 of 5 at one point. And the only road game in there is Houston, which should be, they should have walked through them last year and they didn't, but they should walk through Houston.
At least, Houston might not have Deshaun Watson. So
exactly. So if you look at it in that sense, they got a ton of road games at home. They got road games at home. They got a ton of early games at home. They got a ton of easy games at home. They should clean up early. They really should. They should be going into their first tough game after Tampa, to me. At LA on Thanksgiving's kind of tricky. And then you have the Browns on November 14th in week 10.
I wouldn't completely sleep on New Orleans. Like, I know their quarterback situation is really in flux. And you expect Bill Belichick to be able to beat Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill. But New Orleans has a very good roster. And they're coached extremely well, too, by Sean Payton. So I wouldn't completely sleep on New Orleans.
So I wasn't going to say that they're going to be, undefeated at that point. But, realistically, so they play Carolina November 7th, right? That's their first game in November.
Yeah.
Going into November, 2-3 loss team at most. They have a real chance to do that.
Yeah.
Right? And if they do that, they're right in the thick of things. They don't have either Bills game until later, so there's still those tiebreakers on the line where even if you're back a game, even 2 games, you still have that time to catch up. And then you kind of get into this old school Patriots momentum, and we'll see if it still exists without Tom Brady, but that playing your best football after Thanksgiving, just being a wagon in December, that sort of thing, they have a chance to really be rolling, build some momentum, start to gel before that gauntlet of tougher games comes in the second half. So it is favorable how that's set up if they can stay healthy. But again, they don't have a Sunday off until November. So no, week 11. They don't have a Sunday off until week 11 when they play on a Thursday. And then they'll go Thursday, Sunday, Monday, and then the bye.
So were you surprised that Tampa was so early? Because I wasn't that surprised. And the reason being is 2 things. One, I think that they want to make sure, and I know he's indestructible. I know he's basically a robot, but I think that they do kind of want to make sure that Brady's healthy for that game, right? And you do have to worry about if you get it later on in the season, things can happen. Certainly hasn't really happened to him, right? But things can happen theoretically. So they want to make sure they get that game in early. Make sure
not just Tom Brady. Like, you could throw Rob Gronkowski in that conversation and all that.
Right. They want both these teams fully healthy. But the reason why I was a little disappointed that it was early is because there's no needed for added juice to that, right? The fact that Brady's coming back is plenty of juice for the game on its own, and the ratings and the tickets are going to be just insane. But I would have liked it even more if both teams were in playoff races, right? Like if we're playing in November or December and the Patriots need that game, that I feel like would have been a whole nother layer.
I don't want to need a game against the defending champs, and I certainly don't want to need a game against Tom Brady.
I don't want to need it in that sense. I'm just saying I think that added another layer of buzz. Is okay, well, now not only do they have to play Brady, now not only is he coming home, but at the same time, Bill Belichick and the Patriots need to win this game to stay in the playoff race, and Brady has a chance to essentially knock Bill out of the playoffs. I mean, that would have been a whole lot better than playing it in October, if you ask me.
I think it has enough narratives. I'm also glad it's early because that game's going to have a life of its own. And let's say it was like week 10, 11, 12, right?
Yeah.
Let's say the Patriots play the Saints week 3, right? And they win, but they allow 300 passing yards. The takeaway from that game would be, well, you got to be better than that to beat Brady in 2 months. And that would just be annoying. I don't want to, if it was late in the season, the entire season was going to be comparing the Patriots as to how they'll prepare for that game. And take each game for what it is. I don't want it to dominate the season. I understand the importance. I understand it's going to be fun. I understand it's going to be dramatic. I don't need it to take over the whole season. I really don't. I don't want it to. I think there's a lot of interesting things about this team overall that, you can go too much in that direction with it. Right. We remember
this is also a storyline that for us, us, you and I, we like to get into the nitty gritty of the team.
I want to talk about the games. I don't want this cloud hanging over.
These are ESPN level storylines here, right? This is
So I will tell you this. There is a game I'm surprised isn't earlier. And that's Carolina. Because as
Cam
much
might not be starting by then,
right. As much attention is being paid to Tom Brady's return, Cam's return to Carolina isn't nothing. He's probably the best player that franchise has ever had. And I know there was some weird list on Twitter a couple years ago that said it was Luke Kuechly, who's great, but Cam Newton is the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton is the Carolina Panthers.
It's either Cam or Steve Smith, in my opinion.
It's Cam Newton. It's Cam Newton.
It's one of those two. I don't know if Kuechly, I wouldn't put it Kuechly in
I would say, I guess Steve Smith might be the better football player in terms of Madden rating.
Right.
Importance to the franchise. Cam's a quarterback. It's by default for me. So again, like you said, week 9, is Cam still starting by then? I think he will be, but that's hardly a guarantee. I'm surprised that one wasn't earlier. And you get the Cam comeback. I thought they were going to hand it to Belichick on a silver platter. Carolina, bye week, and then you'd have that perfect chance for Mac Jones to take over, and Cam still gets to start in Carolina.
That's the other really interesting point about the late bye week is
so I was saving that in case we're going to get into that. But
I want to get into that now before we start taking some questions. There really isn't, I don't think, a great place to insert Mac Jones in here, right? If you're obviously, look, it depends. If it's Ryan Fitzpatrick to a situation where Cam's playing pretty well, but we just drafted this guy in the first round and his time is coming regardless of how Cam plays, that sort of thing, then it really doesn't matter, I guess, at the end of the day. But with the bye being so late, there's no place to really put Mac Jones in, and if you're not gonna put Mac Jones in week 15 if the team's competitive, right? If the team is vying for a playoff spot and Cam has them competitive, then you're not gonna just change the whole team that late in the season. So where do we feel like is a sweet spot for Mac Jones to get in there? Because right now it seems a little bit dicey unless Cam just completely falls off the rails.
So it's even tough because if you look in the middle of the schedule, going to LA, that's in some ways a short week because it's such a long trip. You have to leave 12 hours earlier and 12 hours matter, and that's so that's week 8. Are they going to make the switch before week 8? You don't want him to have to face a tough defense, right? You don't want to throw him out. You don't want to throw him to the wolves, right? Against a team like the Carolina Panthers, who are probably a little more of a defensive team at that point, or like the Buffalo Bills, right? You don't want to throw him to the wolves against a team like the Buffalo Bills. Cleveland's a good one. So, I look at it and I think the earliest we talk about, if Cam really struggles, if he really, really struggles, I think you look at after the Tampa Bay game would be the earliest you consider it, because Houston's going to blow and that's the switch. After that, because it's like a highway, right? Like, which exits are you looking at? Where are the logical exits? I think after week 4, after Tampa going to Houston, it is a road game. You might want him to make his first start at home, not have to deal with the travel and all that, but Houston's going to suck. After that, I look at week 7, after the Cowboys, you go into hosting the Jets. The Jets are the Jets. They allowed a franchise high in points allowed last year, decided they didn't need to add anybody on defense. So that's one. After that, it gets real tough. It really does. After that, I'm not sure that there's another logical spot where you put him in.
Yeah, so I actually circled the Jets game too as a good spot, just because it's about halfway through the season.
The second Jets game to be. Oh yeah, because the first one's week 2. So
second Jets game. It's at home. And Robert Saleh, we don't know what Robert Saleh is going to do on his own yet. But for the most part, those Seattle, San Francisco disciples, they do what they do, right? They're not a big game plan defense. They're not a big, they're not going to change it up a whole lot. So Bill Belichick just played Robert Saleh's defense this past year in San Francisco. There's going to be some familiarity of what the scheme is going to look like, I'm sure. So unless Robert Saleh comes out and he's doing something completely different with the Jets than what he was doing in San Fran,
he might not have the personnel to run that scheme, which certainly plays in Mac Jones' favor. But
right. I mean, look, they're not going to play man coverage in New York. I just don't think so. I think they're going to be either a quarters-based team or a cover 3-based team, maybe a little bit of both. And I think that Bill is going to know pretty well what that in Josh McDaniels too, what that Seattle-styled, San Francisco-styled D is going to be like. So that's going to be a game where I think that they have a pretty good feel for the coach and a pretty good feel for what they're going to go up against defensively. And it's a pretty bad defense. So to me, if they're going to just insert Mac Jones in no matter what, we're talking, like I said at the beginning, a Ryan Fitzpatrick Tua type of situation.
Like it's predetermined before the season.
Right, that he's going to go in at some point, unless, he's terrible in practice or something like that. Then I would look at that week 7 game against the Jets. That's the bummer, though. Truly the bummer about the bye being so late is that you just don't have that big bye week. You practice for those couple of days in-house, looking at your own flaws, looking at your own issues, and you're not preparing for an opponent necessarily out on the practice field. So that's a Mac week, right? That's a week to get Mac up to speed.
And they don't even
get Mac in there.
And they don't even have like the Thursday, even if the Thursday game was early, you look at that and you say, okay, it's not a full week, but you have a couple extra days. Like even that's not there. So they really don't have, this is not a schedule built for a team that needs to make a quarterback change.
So I don't know if we want to do. It's really early for record predictions, but we did get asked in the chat about it.
I hate doing record predictions.
But
especially now because I can't just guess my way. Well, it sucks because I have to do the math in my head now. 11-5, 10-4, or sorry, 11-5, 10-6, 12-4. I used to know all the numbers. Now I think in my head. All right, so I'll go. Don't make me do math on the air. 11-6, is that a record?
Yeah, it's a record.
Yeah, that's 17. I can't do that. 11 and I'll say so. I think the Bucs is a tough one. I think that at LA is probably going to be a tough game. I think the Titans are a tough one. The Bills are a tough one. The Colts, and then I'll throw a floater game in there. So yeah, give me 11-6.
Yeah,
which wouldn't be bad. I would take that.
Yeah, I said 10-7 yesterday when we did it after the schedule came out. 10-7, 11-6. I think is maybe a little bit optimistic. Maybe we're being a little bit of optimists with that schedule prediction, but it's hard to ignore what all the things they did in the offseason, right? And it's just It's hard to not kind of see that and say, wow, they have Bill Belichick as their head coach. They have a full offseason for the quarterback, whoever it's going to end up being, and they have all this talent now and in both sides of the football. Like they were 7-9 with a disaster season. Like that was a disaster season by Patriots standards. It kind of feels like the 10-7, 11-6 is pretty comfortable prediction right now for them.
Maybe if they get rolling like a 5, I'm just going to start saying in terms of wins and losses, a 5-loss season's on the table too. Those late games, they have the Bills the day after Christmas in week 16.
Yeah.
And they're at Miami in the last week. Those games at the very least should have playoff implications. Yeah. I am expecting them to, like last year, was it? There were 2 weeks that didn't matter. They should be in it down to the final week. And
I would
especially with that extra playoff spot.
I would love it if Mac Jones is in at quarterback at that point, and we get Trevor Lawrence versus Mac Jones, and then Tua versus Mac Jones for the playoffs. That'd be great.
That Trevor Lawrence game with the 90s flying Elvis shoulder jerseys. I've written this spiel for 98.5. I don't know if I've given it here, Evan, but this year is the 25th anniversary of the 1996 team. That team won the first ever AFC Championship game to be hosted in New England, right? That year, 25 years ago, they won that game. They beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. That game on January 2nd is 10 days before the 25th anniversary of that AFC Championship game.
Okay.
What better way to honor that anniversary than bring back those jerseys? That's all I'm saying. I don't know anything. This isn't a report, but it would make perfect sense. They should absolutely do it. And the Jaguars should bring their 90s jerseys back for that game too, because those were great. Anyways.
So let's get to some of these questions. I think this is a long-winded question, but maybe there's another way to ask this. Who's better prepared for the matchup? Tom Brady or Bill Belichick? Who's going to have the intel? Who's going to have the upper hand in terms of just the mental X's and O's schematic? The chess match between the two guys.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I mean, I like head to head, like Brady's better prepared because he has a better team behind him. But I know that's not what the question is. I'm gonna say Brady because I think Bill. So here's this is a really good question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Let me ask you this: do you think Bill ever held back when working with Brady?
No, but
I guess what I'm saying is, do you think there's maybe a flaw that Bill realized that he never brought up with Brady that he can now exploit?
So I don't think that there's a flaw that he's hiding, like there's some something in his back pocket. But what I think is, and this is Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time, but Tom Brady plays the way Tom Brady plays, right? And I think the difference is for Belichick is that the Patriots and Belichick can morph. Right. They can change who they are week to week. As a coaching staff, they can change up their game plan. They can go into it with a different approach. With Brady, like they know he's going to be in the pocket. They know what he's going to want to do with the ball. They know that he's going to want to get rid of it quickly. Like they know all of these things about his playing style. Whereas with Brady, like he's preparing during the week. Maybe he's preparing for a lot of man coverage. Maybe he's preparing for a lot of blitzing. Maybe I don't know. Maybe whatever he thinks is sort of Belichick's.
But he's been in that room when they've come up with game plans, so he's going to have.
But I kind of feel like Bill Belichick you're not going to give Tom Brady something he's never seen before, but I think you might see Bill do something that Tom Brady's never seen Bill do before. Right. Maybe it's something, maybe it's something that, is just the Patriots have been playing one way the first 3 weeks of the season, and they come out and they've been playing 90% man coverage, and then in week 4 they come out and they play a bunch of quarters, right? Or something like that. Like I just kind of feel like Belichick has more ways to morph. He has more cards in his deck because Brady is who Brady is. And that's a great football player, but he does what he does. Whereas with a coach, you can have different game plans. And the Patriots build their roster in order to have different game plans. So I just kind of feel like if someone's going to change up and throw a curveball to the other, it's probably going to be Bill, not Brady.
And somebody made a good point in the chat. Brady is what he is in terms of, what he can do physically. Bill's working more on the mental side where it can be changed. Right. I asked you this half jokingly. Did the Patriots draft Christian Barmore specifically for this game? Because we all know the way to beat Brady is pressure up the middle.
Yeah, I don't know if it's specifically for this game, but they've been clamoring for that interior pass rusher since like Dominique Easley, right? Like they've tried this road before.
If I'm looking at the schedule,
you could have a big game. I mean, they have a great offensive line in Tampa, but
which game? Well, I'm not a big Ryan Jensen guy, as I've said on this show. Where's the first game where you're really looking for Christian Barmore to get unleashed, and if they're really going to throw him out there and play him a good amount, it's that Tampa game. That's Miami, I think you need to be too cautious about the run, even with the receivers they have. I think you need to be more cautious against the run. The Jets, certainly, with the more mobile quarterback, I think you want bigger guys who can set the edge and keep Zach Wilson in the pocket. I don't know what the Saints are going to be. I think they're just going to throw 8 guys into coverage on every snap and let Jameis throw them the football. And that'll be what they do. But yeah, against Tampa, that could be the first game where we see Christian Barmore kind of let loose.
Okay, so that leads into this next question about, we've seen in the past that the Patriots have been slow starters, right? And some people like to say that they kind of treat the first month of the season as sort of an extension of the preseason. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because some years they start great, some years they don't start great. So it kind of does fluctuate a little bit. But this year, after they spent all this money in free agency, draft the uncharacteristically aggressive Alex, I find it hard to believe that the Patriots are not going to come out guns blazing instantly in week 1. Like I feel like this is not going to be one of those seasons where they ease themselves into the year. I think they feel like they're playing with the chip on their shoulder.
So can I put my tinfoil hat on for a second here?
Sure.
So this isn't too crazy, but it's a little conspiracy theory-ish probably. I agree that I think they're going to come out a little more aggressive and not do this whole extended preseason thing. I think a huge difference, even with the one less preseason game. Remember, there's now a week between the preseason and the season. Like that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Right? Like the third preseason game is still when it was. The opener is still when it was. There's an extra just nothing week that I'm guessing is going to be treated. So we get like full access to camp until late in the preseason.
Usually like week 2 or 3 of the preseasons when they close camp. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that extra week becomes like an extra grueling preseason prep week.
Yeah.
And they can use that to iron out some of the things they normally would in weeks 1 or 2. I think that 1 week is going to make a difference in how they prepare.
Nobody asked this question, but for the first time in a long time, I am really pumped for the preseason games.
I am too.
Because it's probably just because they got canceled last year.
Is it because it got canceled? Is it because of Mac? Is it like
it's because of all of it? This team is brand new, and they're gonna have to throw some people out there. Like they're not gonna be able to give Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith and Nelson Aguilar and some of the Matt Judon and these guys like veterans, games off early on in the preseason, right? Like there's only 3 games. I don't think they're gonna do that because
you don't think they will? I thought you said they could. You know what?
They could obviously do it, but I don't see that because this team is going to need to gel. This is a lot of new faces and big roles. I think that they're going to need to gel a little bit. And I don't know. I've never looked forward to the preseason really. I've always thought it was kind of a drag, but now that it's only 3 games and you have all these storylines and all these new faces to talk about and a rookie quarterback, I mean, in a quarterback competition in general, it sounds pretty fun now.
And you know what? It's 3 weeks too, which almost makes me more excited for it.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's less of a, like, I know I sound spoiled. Oh, it's such a drag covering football. But when you have to sit up there, especially in recent years, when they got rid of the 75-man roster cut down, right? And they went straight from 90 to 53.
Yeah.
That 4th preseason game became completely irrelevant. They played nobody. They played all the guys that they were going to cut. And again, I cover football for a living. I love it. I wouldn't trade it. But when you have to sit there, because you guys want content, you deserve content. You're good fans, but you want content. And so I don't like to dumb it down for people. I don't. I like to try to have intelligent, real football conversations with people. I think that's what they deserve. But boy, coming up with real intelligent football conversations and not pandering to you guys, like try not to pander to you guys after the week 4 preseason game when nobody who played is going to make the team. Oh, it was brutal. That was brutal. It was one of the toughest nights of the year every year. So I won't miss that. Maybe the 3rd preseason game turns into that, but I don't think it will.
Yeah,
at least not anytime soon.
I don't think so either because of that break that you mentioned, right? So they have this built-in break now between the last preseason game and the start of the regular season. So they kind of have to get some reps in these preseason games. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think both Cam Newton and Mac Jones are going to play in the preseason. They're both going to get a chance to play a little bit, and we're going to see a true quarterback competition at least in August. I think at some point, kind of like last year, first couple of weeks of training camp was a true competition. Then about 8-9 days in, they kind of turned it over to Cam being QB1. I think you could see a similar thing. The Patriots did not sign Drake Kirkpatrick yet. He is sort of on the wait and see, just in case emergency list right now.
Wait, can we talk about that one real quick, though?
I do want to talk about Kirkpatrick, and I want to talk about the cornerback position in general, because I think that their depth there is a little bit thin.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it. I said it on the show. We were live when Jason McCourty signed. I think that they like to rotate. And J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore are your top 2. That's what it is. But they both have some injury history, and they just like to keep those guys fresh. And maybe Juwan Williams wins that role in camp. He's probably the leader right now. And I saw some people say, why aren't more people just, counting Juwan Williams into that role? Even if he can do it, even if they think he can do it, a little competition's never bad. And I don't know that that's the role they have him in. It seems like they might see him as more of a safety, and it's an important role, right? Juwan Williams, even if they think he can do it, it's not like he's done it a ton. I don't know that I'd be comfortable. I do think he's a solid player, but I don't know that I'm comfortable enough going into the season just carte blanche. He's the guy. I wouldn't lock him into that role. I think Drake Kirkpatrick is a veteran. He's big. He's got long arms. He's got impeccable ball skills. That's the kind of corner they like. He'd be a great guy to put in that spot. And you know what? If he works out, you've got 2 corners who are on 1-year contracts. You're not going to sign Drake Kirkpatrick long-term, but he's a guy that if he has a good 2021, I think you seriously look at bringing back for 1 more year in 2022 and maybe using as a bridge second outside corner. So I think they need to fill the role. I think he'd be a really good player to fill it. So I lit up when I saw this today. I think that would be a great signing for them.
Yeah, you mentioned the length, press man.
And he is from Bama, as they pointed out in the chat. Roll Tide.
Of course. Press man background, right? Going back to his Bama days last year in Arizona, he had a rough season, missed like 11 tackles. It was ugly for him last year, but they are not a very press man heavy system. He comes here, he plays some more man coverage again. Like you said, kind of that Jason McCourty, right? That is that third outside corner. That's a veteran that's been around the block, that's played snaps in the NFL, that understands the game, understands what's going to be expected of him, that they don't have. And I kind of broke it down. I only kept 4 corners in my first 53-man roster projection because D'Angelo Ross, Mike Jackson, these are the guys that we're picking from to get a 5th guy on the team, right? It's a really thin group. Obviously, they have Jonathan Jones to play inside. They have Jalen Mills to play inside. But you're not going to put those guys on the outside. So really behind J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore, and let's also remind ourselves that Stephon Gilmore is coming off a pretty bad knee injury from last year over the age of 30. I think he's going to be fine. And from everything I hear, he's going to be fine. But that could be a situation that has to be managed if that knee flares up again on Williams, basically to take the bull by the horns and be able to carry that role as that depth corner. I think they need another veteran corner, whether it's Drake Kirkpatrick or somebody that they get towards the end of training camp, in sort of one of those trades that they like to make at the end of camp when guys are going to get cut and they flip, a late round pick, or they do a player for player trade to fill a hole from a position of strength, something like that. There's a lot of ways to do it. But certainly I feel like we haven't talked about, and we did talk about it before the draft because we broke down all the corners in the draft.
We talked about it a little after because we was it on the show? Did we talk about Sherman? Or we talked a little bit about Sherman. Yeah, somebody brought up Garyon Connolly in the chat. That's another good name too.
Yeah, they don't. Those Ohio State guys, they don't like him.
Weren't they linked to Connolly in the draft when he came out, or am I imagining that?
That does. I mean, look, he's a man coverage guy too, right? And whenever you got guys that have some press man kind of ability and experience, they're going to be guys that potentially could be, on the Patriots radar. It just feels to me like, look, Jason McCourty might not have been that guy for whatever reason. I'm not sure, but he might not have been that guy, but somebody has to be that guy to me, because you were just putting a whole lot in the Juwan Williams basket right now, right? A whole lot of eggs are in the Juwan Williams basket to be that depth, and you never need depth until you need it, right? That's what Bill Belichick always says.
Rather have it, not need it, than need it, not have it.
Right. So we'll see what happens at that cornerback spot. But we went into the draft expecting them to take a corner. We had some mock drafts where they had, J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain or a corner in the first round. It didn't end up breaking that way. And I don't think anybody should be disappointed that they took a quarterback in the first round. But they didn't end up addressing really that cornerback position. And now there is kind of a hole there.
Yeah, but again, they can still fill it, and there's still a lot of talent out there. They're going to sign somebody. I would be shocked if they go into camp. It might be a week or two. It might be tomorrow. It might be a week or two. Let me check Twitter. It didn't just happen, because that would be funny. But yeah, they're going to sign somebody at some point. There's talent out there. It's just a matter of who and when. I'd be shocked if they went into camp with just this group, and it's nothing against this group. And there's other positions where this is true. Maybe with corner, it's a little more, you're looking at regular season depth, but there's some positions where they need more depth just for camp to operate the way it needs to operate. Yeah. Like, they need another interior offensive lineman. They need another safety. These guys don't necessarily have to be guys you're considering putting on the roster, but they just need the bodies at this point for the preseason depth. So they don't have to, like you said, so they don't have to play guys like Michael Onwenu late into preseason games. So they don't have to play a guy like maybe Devin McCourty or Jalen Mills late into a preseason game.
Right.
So I'm still waiting for those signings to trickle in. We'll see when they happen. But yeah, corner's probably the biggest one, where you're looking at not just camp depth, but regular season depth as well.
I also want to point out before we move on that the league is still undecided about how they're going to break up rosters this year, whether they're going to let teams house the full 90 on one practice field, or we're going to go down to the 80 or the 90 split that they had last year. We're getting a little bit late in the game, typical NFL with this pandemic situation. All these decisions have been very late in the game, but the Patriots seem to be one of those teams that are kind of in a holding pattern with filling out to the 90-man roster limit until they figure out, are we allowed to have all 90 guys in one spot, on the practice field, right? Or are we going to have to do the split squad thing like they did, like the rules were last year? From everything that you hear, the CDC coming out today saying people don't have to wear masks that are vaccinated. Like, there's no reason for them not to allow 90 football players on one field, especially you go down. I'm sure a lot of people in the chat have been to the Patriots training camp. How big of an area that is back there. We're all going to be fine if they allow 6 more guys on the field. There are 10 more guys on the field than they were going to allow. But until the league makes that call, I think a lot of these kind of veteran Drake Kirkpatrick type of signings, like we haven't got into the Marquise Lee signing yet. Like who's the 7th wide receiver, veteran wide receiver project that they're going to bring back, that guy that had a good season 5 years ago. Like, we haven't gotten to that point. A lot of that, I think, is because the league is kind of dragging its feet on those types of decisions. All right, let's move on to the next.
So I would just say, too, with roster size, to keep in mind, the other thing, we don't know if it's going to be a 53-man roster. There's been some rumblings that with the extra game, it could be 55 or 56. So that might impact, if they know it's a 53-man roster, they may just bring in camp bodies and stop it there. If they can keep 56 guys, maybe they get a little more aggressive and go for a guy who will make more of a push to make the team.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. All right, there is a good question here about the running backs room and just how many running backs, of course, now I can't find it. How many running backs are the Patriots? Do we see the Patriots carrying? I had them carrying technically 6. Brandon Bolden was the 6th guy. So whether you want to call that 5 and a special teamer or 6, that's up to you.
Is that no fullbacks, right? That's not Johnson or whoever.
I list the fullbacks under tight ends and fullbacks because that's where those guys work out in practice. But how many running backs do you see the Patriots carrying? Because it is a spot where they have some pretty good depth.
So I think ideally they'd carry 6. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody we know. Sony's done this 2 of his 3 years in the league where he opens the season on PUP. Right, yeah. He did that I think as a rookie, and then he did it last year.
Yeah. It sounds like he's not. I haven't heard of any injury with Sony.
I don't know that he's hurt either, but sometimes we just find out the first day of camp, like, oh, this guy had this surgery or this guy had this surgery. So I wonder if there's a guy who's rehabbing some injury we don't know about. Actually, Damian Harris got hurt at the end of the year last year. So maybe Damian Harris doesn't start the season. Maybe it's Sony. Maybe it's, Brandon Bolden. Again, they're not going to make up an injury for this guy, but, maybe there's some way they figure out a way where they carry 5 running backs to start. I don't know what it would be, but they get creative with this thing. But I think they're going to keep 6 guys. I don't see who they cut unless JJ Taylor has a really bad camp, just because there's not a lot of money tied up in them. But I think that they're keeping all 6. I think in a perfect world, they'll keep all 6, but you're really getting up against it then. You're carrying 16. You're carrying what that'd be 16 skill position players, right?
Right. Well,
4
so
tight
the
ends,
question,
6 receivers.
You got to kind of find a roster spot, I think, to carry the 5th back by maybe they don't carry all 4 tight, a true fullback on this team, right? Like, Could they go and put Jakob Johnson or maybe a Dan Vitale on the practice squad so that if one of the tight ends gets hurt and they have to go to more regular personnel, that they're able to bring a fullback up at that point? Can Dalton Keene be a fullback? Can you align Johnny Smith in the backfield, as sort of an H-back fullback type?
Well, the other thing is there. Right. And so tinfoil hat on here. If they want to, so that's one kind of fullback, right? If they want the move fullback, the pass catching fullback, right? But obviously that's not what they've had the last couple of years. James Devlin into Jakob Johnson, that's more than just extra blocking. I wonder if Brandon Bolden could do that. I mean, he plays special teams, so he understands the concepts of leverage and all of that. We know he understands, the offense, and blocking is mental as much as it is physical. We've seen them do it before. They haven't done it in a long time. But Joey Iosefa did a little bit of that. He played deep back and up back. Patrick Pass, and I know I'm going way back here to practically a different offense, but Patrick Pass played a little deep back, played a little up back. Kyle Eckel did it in the preseason, and you can Google all these names, but it wouldn't be totally out of left field for them to do. It would be extreme. It wouldn't be unheralded. It would be extreme, but again, you're in this spot where there's going to be a roster crunch. You want to figure out how to keep as much NFL talent and as much versatility as possible. If they're going to do that, I at least try it in camp and put Brandon Bolden in front of Sony Michel in the eye and say, okay, what does this look like?
So I think that the thing that's interesting to me about 2 things. One, I think we got to see, how does Ramondre Stevenson look in camp, and not just to us, but what are they saying about Ramondre Stevenson, right? And
does he hold on to the football?
And does he hold on to the football? Because if Ramondre Stevenson has a good enough camp and they're confident in him enough, even as a rookie, which obviously is a long shot, Sony Michel does become a little bit expendable. Now, what can you get for Sony Michel in a trade? I'm not really sure if you can get much of anything for Sony Michel in a trade. But if you're just freeing up a roster spot and you flip Sony for a day 3 pick, or you flip Sony for a depth player at a different position or something like that, then I could see that happening. I could definitely see Sony getting traded. The other thing is we do have to think about, in terms of roster construction for other teams, the other 31 teams, not a lot of teams carry a traditional fullback anymore, right? There's just not a lot of open roster spots, not a lot of competition for traditional fullbacks. So I just kind of feel like you might be able to get Jakob Johnson back on the practice squad. Like if they cut Jakob Johnson, what teams that want to play with a fullback don't already have a fullback on their roster?
No, and that's fair. To me, it's not so much about losing the player. It's more about, if he's on maybe they do practice squad elevations this year, and that's how they get around it. We don't know if those are coming back. If not, if Johnson's in the practice squad, okay, you didn't lose the player, but you can't use him. You throw that all out. Somebody brought up a very interesting point in the chat. I mentioned all these players the Patriots used to use at fullback. Maybe that's how Chase Winovich makes the team. He's a versatile defensive piece. He was a tight end. He was a tight end in college.
Stop it. There's a better chance of a guy like Dalton Keene transitioning to fullback and being sort of a fullback tight end that adds depth to 2 places, right?
But is he going to be the guy? I'm just thinking who's going to hit that hole the hardest and move the linebacker out of the hole?
Jakob Johnson.
Right, but I'm saying if you don't keep that traditional fullback, we've seen them do it before. We've seen them do it before.
In like on the goal line and like special packages. We haven't seen like a guy like come out and play fullback. Like I guess Landon Roberts is probably like the closest.
That's true. There you go. Actually, I should have brought that one up. That's a very good point.
Of course, I just like contradicted myself by remembering the Landon Roberts.
But I mean, we've talked about this a couple of times that when it comes to this roster this year, this is not like, some years we say, oh, it's going to be like a tight battle at camp. Oh, there's not a ton of roster spots. This is another level. Yeah. I've thrown this stat out there before. The Patriots generally sign 10 to 20 UDFAs. 90% of those guys are camp bodies that are getting cut. When you're really working on a roster projection from the 90-man roster, you're generally looking at 60 to 65 players, maybe 70 in like a loaded year. This year, it's closer to 80 players we're working with that realistically could make this team. So if you're a fringe player and you want to make the team, you have to go above and beyond. You can't just be good at one thing. You have to add some sort of value that doesn't just make it worth keeping you. It makes it worth keeping you.
That's why I feel like one of the,
and that's where, if you're a non-fullback who can play fullback, if you're a defensive lineman who can also play linebacker, if you're one of these positions and you excel at covering kicks, like those are the things that are going to be the difference. So as nuts as I sound saying, oh, maybe they try Chase Winovich at fullback, maybe they try Brandon Bolden at fullback, maybe they try what I say last week, Dalton Keene at running back. Like
I feel like Dalton Keene at fullback is the way to go here. Like if you're going to get creative, like transitioning him to fullback is the way to go. And like I think the one other thing that you can mention is, look, they're going to be a 12 personnel team. They're going to run two tight ends. They're going to run two tight ends. They're going to run a running back and two wideouts. That's going to be their base package. There's no fullback in that equation, right? So the only reason why they would truly need a traditional fullback is if Hunter Henry or Jonnu Smith gets hurt and they then have to go back to 21 and they have to go back to regular personnel, then okay, you might need to go back into that traditional fullback mode. But look, you look at these two quarterbacks too with Mac Jones and Cam Newton. They're not under center quarterbacks, right? Like those are not two guys that are at their best or have a ton of experience in Mac Jones's case as a regular traditional under center, strong eye formation, power eye formation. Like that's really not what Alabama does anymore. It's not what Cam Newton has done throughout his career. So maybe there's a chance that with the versatility that they have at tight end, they just don't carry a fullback. Like I think there's a possibility of that happening.
That's true. But I mean, this little spoiler, we talked to Tim Jenkins earlier today. The show will drop on Tuesday, and he made a good point. Josh McDaniels going to run what Josh McDaniels wants to run. So if he wants to do that, he needs a fullback. And just like to go back real quick, what I was saying, I know some of this stuff is ludicrous, right? And I'm kind of just spitballing, and it's, I know it's ridiculous, but again, they get ridiculous sometimes, but they do. And this is an extreme circumstance when it comes to putting together this 53-man roster. It's never like, this is not an arguably. There has never been a more competitive training camp roster in terms of depth than the Patriots have right now. They are going to have to think outside the box to keep certain players that they are going to want to keep. So I feel like we can get a little bit nuts in speculating, and we'll see. None of this stuff will probably happen. Maybe one of the things I say happen. One of my crackpot ideas happens. But you're going to see them do some weird things this year with the personnel they've brought in, with some of the shifts they're making in terms of the roster, just the raw NFL talent they have. They're going to do some unusual things this year. Some of them will work. Most of them probably won't, but it's going to happen.
And when they do, you can say that you heard it here first.
I'll take my victory.
Okay, so we can get to a few more questions here before we sign off.
Do we want to do the trap game question?
We will at the end. There's a couple of questions about Jared Stidham and just sort of his outlook. And I think both of us, especially after they drafted Mac Jones, that basically tells you everything that anybody needs to hear about what the team thinks of Jared Stidham. Are they going to carry three quarterbacks? Is Stidham a potential trade chip? Where does he fit into this equation? Because I don't really think that there's a big time need for him to be on the team, quite frankly.
So, and this is I apologize in advance. This is a very annoying answer. I think it's going to come down to where COVID is at. And I know everything's opening back up, and I'm glad it is, right? That we're losing the masks, and they got rid of the directional arrows in the supermarket, which is huge because I get lost in the supermarket all the time. I'm not good at food shopping. But the point being, I know it's all opening back up, but the NFL seems to be taking things very seriously. When mini camps opened, they went right back to the procedures they had at this time last year. And obviously we know where we were as a country this time last year. Those are, by today's standards, pretty severe restrictions. It's still going to be, if you're in a house and somebody who you live with was exposed to somebody, not even you were directly exposed, but somebody you live with is exposed to, you miss time, yada, yada, yada. If the restrictions are still severe, I think you have to keep 3 quarterbacks, and they probably will keep Stidham because of his familiarity.
Yeah.
If things are open back up, not just with the world, but with the NFL. And, it's, hey, unless you personally test positive, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
The team is fully vaccinated.
Right. If everybody's vaccinated and it's all in the clear, then there's a real case to make for them cutting Stidham. Again, I know that's an annoying answer, but we saw kind of how the third quarterback resurged last year with COVID. I do think they care too much about the position to just say, we'll stash somebody on the practice squad, and if worse comes to worse, we'll use them. I think they want somebody familiar with the system, but if they don't have to worry about COVID, I think Stidham's on the outside looking in.
Yeah, and I just think before we even get into the conversation with cutting Stidham, does Stidham have any trade value whatsoever? I don't necessarily think he's got great trade value, but if he kind of lights it up in the preseason, like if they let him play as sort of in a showcase basis, right, to sort of go up against second and third and fourth stringers, guys that are not going to be on teams in a couple of weeks, and that fourth preseason game that Jacoby Brissett had, all those years ago, that type of game, then I think that you can get something. I'm not going to sit here and say you're going to get a first round pick for Jarrett Stidham, but I think you can get something, and that might behoove them to make that move.
You could probably pick swap him. You're not going to get your 4th round pick back, but Stidham in a 7th for a 6th, something like that. And that's probably a move they'd look to make. They have no 6th, 3 7ths. If they're going to trade Stidham, that's in the ballpark, but I think that's realistic. At the end of the day, he was a 4th round pick. We know how teams fall in love with quarterbacks. There may be some team that saw him at Auburn that thinks they have the key to unlock him that the Patriots were missing, and they'll pay a small price to get that chance. And I would be surprised if he's outright released unless he just absolutely blows in the preseason.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be cut. He's one of those players I don't see being cut. All right, let's get to this one. Sneaky, tough matchup on the schedule. Trap game, whatever you want to call it. Alex, what's your trap game?
So my trap game is the Atlanta game. It's Thursday night on the road, which is always scary. I'm trying to pull a schedule up right here. I closed it because this take involves the games before and after. Here we go. So, you're coming off, I think that Cleveland game, week 10, low key could be one of the most exciting games of the year, both in terms of the game itself, and you're getting it to mid-November at that point. There's playoff stakes on the line. Both of those teams should be competing at least for wild card spots. That's a big game. You then got to go on a short week. The Falcons. After that, you've got Tennessee and then the Bills, which are 2 huge games. If I hate the trap game concept, but people love to talk about it. I think if a game gets lost in translation, it's that one. And then my honorable mention goes to the Houston game. It's right after Tampa. It's the only game in a 5-game stretch that's on the road. That team is absolutely terrible. That might be one that you kind of sleepwalk through the prep. Those are the 2 I'm looking at as potential trap games.
So I don't think they're going to be a trap game because I actually think the Chargers are going to be pretty good. So I think you're going to be aware that that's going to be a tougher game. But
that's fair because the question isn't trap game; it's sneaky. Tough, which is more what you said.
Yeah, so I really like Brandon Staley, their head coach hire. I know that hiring defensive-minded coaches goes against the grain these days, right? You don't do it anymore or whatever. But Brandon Staley had one of the best coaching seasons last year as an assistant for the Rams out of anybody in the NFL. Really kind of brought in a lot of modern defensive scheme to the league in terms of what's going on in college to stop spread, to stop option football, to stop some of the different things that teams are doing. And they played, and granted, this was because they had such a great defensive line in LA with Aaron Donald and those guys. They played a lot of 2 deep, right? They played a lot of quarters.
Yeah.
And they got away with it because they had great players in the front 7. I think the Chargers have similar talent in the front 7, especially with Joey Bosa anchoring them. So I think that's going to be a really tough team. I think Herbert played a lot better than their record was last year. So I know the Patriots blew them out last year, and a bad Patriots team blew them out last year. But I think the Chargers are an up-and-coming team. I think that's going to be a difficult one. I also agree that Atlanta is going to be a tough game as well because they got a veteran quarterback. And you just don't know what the state of the Patriots are going to be at that point. It's a short week against a good veteran QB and Matt Ryan. I think that one could be a sneaky tough game too. But yeah, I think the Chargers have a really good team. I think they're going to have a tough time. It could be a competitive team this year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing. Hopefully, we get Herbert versus Mac, and we can compare the two young guys because two guys that Herbert didn't fall quite as far as Mac did. But two young guys that got kind of blasted in the pre-draft process, right, for not having some of the other things that other guys have and stuff like that. And it turned out to be completely wrong with Justin Herbert. So we'll see what happens in terms of the Chargers. But I feel like they have a chance on paper to be a pretty good team. And we'll see. I think that Matt Jones is going to start this year. I've been on the record saying that I think he's going to get in at some point this year and be the starter. I don't know when it's going to happen. We kind of broke down some options of when that could potentially happen. But the Tuesday show, the reason why I brought this up, we spoke with Tim Jenkins, quarterback coach, guru, analyst, and we had a really great conversation both about Cam, about Mac Jones, about quarterback development in general. So that's going to air on the Tuesday show, and I'm really looking forward to you guys hearing that one because Tim is a really smart guy and really understands. He used to play quarterback in the NFL for the Los Angeles Rams, then the St. Louis Rams. Told us some good stories about Sam Bradford sucking in rookie OTAs and stuff like that were funny. So be on the lookout for that on Tuesday. Alex, anything else you want to leave the people with as we sign off?
Let me just drop a quick breaking news here. Nothing major. I'm curious your take on this. Mike Garofalo just now. Deshaun Hamilton. Broncos taking calls on Deshaun Hamilton. We know the people want a wide receiver. You interested at all in that? I really like Deshaun.
I liked
Hamilton
him coming out
of college.
So did I.
Would you give up like a 6th round pick for Deshaun Hamilton?
Thought I saw earlier that he was getting waived, but I guess now they're trying to work out the trade.
Garofalo reported 3 years ago that they were waiving him, and now here's the exact updating here. The Broncos got calls on wide receiver Deshaun Hamilton later this afternoon, sources say. So he hasn't been officially waived yet, and don't close the door on a trade. Stay tuned.
So one of those guys that's incredibly shifty at the top of the route, right? A very good separation type of guy at the top of the break, can play out of the slot, has some of that jitterbug slot type of mentality about him. It's not a bad flyer to take when you're trying to think about, okay, like, you're probably going to give up most of those slot reps to Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers, but neither one of those guys are true, like, jitterbug at the top of the route type of guys, right? They're quick, but they're not necessarily Edelman quick. And I think Deshaun Hamilton has a little bit of that in him. I'm not saying he's Julian Edelman, but he's got a little bit of that quickness in him. In Denver, there's a lot of wide receivers there, right? It's kind of a log jam that they have there of young wideouts. So he's obviously the one outside looking in. The Patriots, it's fine. That's a good move, I think, for the Patriots in terms of just taking a flyer on a guy that's got some upside and got some talent and does kind of seem like someone that could be a system fit playing inside.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of pounded the table and said they have enough wide receivers, but this is the kind of move. If you want to add a wide receiver, this is the move you make. And you grab him and maybe he makes the team, maybe he doesn't. He's maybe a guy you can get to the practice squad. Wouldn't be a bad move if they brought him in, I don't think.
I really liked him in the draft. I mean, it hasn't worked out in Denver, but I don't know if they've necessarily had the system and the quarterback to
he just got buried.
Wide receiver, right?
He got buried on the depth chart, and there's bad. I mean, because they drafted Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy the next 2 years, and he just
he
never really got his
and
fair
KJ
share.
Hamler too. If you're gonna be that type of wide receiver, that shifty guy, that slot guy that's good at the top of the route, you have to have the right quarterback to throw you the football in those situations. A guy that's accurate, that gets it out on time, that reads leverage quickly. Not somebody like Drew Lock who wants to throw the ball down the field, right? That's not really the type of wide receiver that fits what they want to do. So, they want the Judys, they want the Suttons, they want those guys to get up the field. Right. The Tim Patricks. That's a loaded room. There's a lot of talent in that Denver wide receiver room. So somebody was going to be the odd man looking in. I guess if you wanted to do a day 3 pick swap type thing, and they were going to cut him anyways.
Tell me if I'm getting too creative here. Maybe Deshaun Hamilton in a pick for N'Keal Harry.
I mean,
you don't hate it. You don't
I don't hate it.
I'm just because we've talked about N'Keal needing a change of scenery. He's a much better fit for what they do in Denver.
Yeah.
Deshaun Hamilton's probably making the roster if you make that move. You also get to pick up a pick. I'm just saying.
I have a piece coming out tomorrow about Mac Jones and RPOs and stuff like that, and just looking at like the adaptations and how the Patriots are going to adjust the offense and vice versa, and how they kind of fit, right? How the whole thing fits. And I watched a bunch of the Patriots ran 70 RPOs last year, which was a lot more than any other year they've ran with Brady, certainly, obviously. In 2019, they ran 4. Last year they ran 70. So that was obviously a clear, we're moving towards this with Cam Newton. Right. And N'Keal Harry, especially early on in the season, he was often the featured ball carrier on their RPO bubble screens, right? They run the run action in the middle of the field. They have the RPO bubble screen on the perimeter. The quarterback reads the defender and makes the decision. And it was just flabbergasting to watch how often N'Keal Harry just ran straight into contact. Like he had like a crease a little bit. He had some space and he would just run directly into the defender with the ball in his hands. And if he can't do that. Like he just doesn't have a great feel. Like it just kind of he lost his feel for that yak ability. And I don't know. I watched a bunch more of that tape and I'm just kind of like, what's his role? Like what's his upside here? Like what's the point at this point with that player? And yeah, maybe they do find a way to move it. I don't know if Denver has a use for N'Keal Harry, but it's one failed wide receiver pick for another.
Maybe they think they can fix him, and he's more of a fit for what they do. Yeah, he's the guy. He backs up Tim Patrick. He lets you kind of keep Tim Patrick fresh.
There was one play in particular in the Seattle game. I know we're going on a rant here, but N'Keal Harry had a tractor trailer could have ran through this hole, and Damiere Byrd is blocking on the outside on the bubble, and he gets pushed back a little bit, but for some reason N'Keal Harry just runs right into his guy that he's blocking, and like the guy tripped him up, and he gains like 4 yards. Easily could have been like a 10-yard gain, and he gained like 3 or 4.
We call that pulling a Trent Richardson.
He's like a magnet for contact, right? Like it's just
because do you remember the picture of Trent Richardson against the Raiders? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, he's a magnet for contact. He just finds a way to go to the worst possible place on the field. And it's shocking to remember watching him at Arizona State and studying him at Arizona State before the draft and how good he was with the ball in his hands to how much he has regressed in that respect now is just wow. It's disappointing because I thought that was at least going to translate. All right. Tuesday show, Tim Jenkins, quarterback talk, all 50 minutes of it, some great developmental quarterback talk, and some things later on about developmental leagues and spring leagues and PJ Walker and all sorts of cool stuff with Tim. So be on the lookout for that on Tuesday. Thanks so much for watching tonight, guys, and for asking all the questions. And we'll be back next Thursday with another Q&A. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching.